Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to record this week's Zera Shimshon class because, as we know, this Thursday night is Chanukah, the second night of Chanukah, and we want to make sure that everyone is enjoying the time with their family and friends, and we don't want to take away from that special opportunity. That doesn't mean we're going to stop learning, and you shouldn't stop learning at home. In fact, perhaps even teaching over a special Torah has an extra ma'alah, extra level, and extra importance and significance during the time of Chanukah. This year especially, because we know that the Chagim of the other of non-Jews is also celebrated during this time, and there was a time that maybe we should spread more light and more Torah during this time, and especially because we know that one of the main reasons, or one of the main decrees that the Greeks tried to decree was to prevent us from learning Torah. So perhaps our learning Torah is even more necessary, and especially nowadays we want to see more and more nisim. Just a thought that the Maharami Prague says that during the time of Chanukah, the number 8 is a very, very is me'ala teva, and it's a very has a great significance. And every year when we make the brachot, and every year when we light the candles, and every year when we look at the candles and we enjoy the Chag and we enjoy the light of the Chag, there are miracles, and Bezrat Hashem we should see many, many miracles around this time. So this week we're going to the Zera Shimshon has a few Torahs around Chanukah. The first 3 in Parshat Mikeitz. Parshat Mikeitz always falls out on Chanukah. We are not going to do those 3 on Chanukah. One of them happens to be very, very long, and the second one is a little bit more deep in terms of its Kabbalistic in content. So we're going to choose do Torah 13. The Yud Gimel, Ot Yud Gimel in the Zera Shimshon. So the topic around what the Zera Shimshon is asking is, what is the purpose of Galut, and what is our mindset? As a little bit of an introduction, let's take a step back and what happened at the end of last week's Parsha, and that will kind of bring us into where we're going with it. At the end of last week's Parsha, we know that Yosef was sent to prison of the servants of the king. There he predicted correctly that the Sar HaMashkim will be saved, and the Sar HaOfim will be killed. And he told the Sar HaMashkim to please remember him. Unfortunately, he did not remember him. And at the end, at the last week's Parsha is Vayishkachehu. And then in this week's Parsha, we start with Paro's dreams. And Paro's dreams, we realize that Paro needs to have his dreams interpreted. And lo and behold, it's Hashem sent Yosef through the Sar HaMashkim again, through the Sar HaMashkim, and he gets to interpret Paro's dreams and determines that there will be 7 years of Sava, of great prosperity and sustenance, and then there will be also 7 years followed by 7 years of famine. In continuing with our introduction, we see that Yaakov Avinu sends the 9 out of the 10 out of the 11, because Binyamin is not sent yet. He sends down 10 sons down to Mitzrayim to get food. So one of the questions already asked is, we see, and later on in this week's Parsha, we see that Yaakov Avinu had quite a bit of food, and the things that he sent down to Yosef after the sons come back, those are signs of wealth. Those aren't signs of poverty and famine. So the response, if we look at the response and we look at the answer in the Gemara, based on the Gemara in Ta'anit, the Gemara there says, Lama titra'u. And the Gemara in Ta'anit says, Yaakov is telling his sons, the Gemara in Ta'anit is on Daf Yud Amud Bet, the Gemara says to him, this Yaakov is telling him, don't worry that you're, don't show, or Yaakov is saying to them, don't show that the word Lama Titra'u is in Bereshit Perek Mem Bet in the 42nd chapter, and it says there, based on that, the Gemara in Tanit says Yaakov is telling the sons, don't show that you are full or that you are you have food, not in front of Esav and not in front of Ishmael, so that way they're not jealous of you. So from this, the Gemara actually takes away 3 very interesting halachic lessons, and then through that we're going to weave ourselves back into Ot Yud Gimel of the Zera Shimshon. this is a matter of introduction, and it actually has a lot of importance as we get closer into the Zera Shimshon itself. So it says that the Gemara learns 4 important things. So it's also as we learn that what the Gemara learns 4 things. One is that when you go to one place that they don't fast to a place that you do fast, obviously we should fast with them. That's the Gemara there. And then the other one is that a place that we go, if someone is going from a place that they do fast to a place that they don't fast, right? You should fast and also be mashlim, meaning you should complete it, meaning you shouldn't stop fasting. So it means you shouldn't change your minhag for one place or another, right? Let's say you forgot for some reason. The third halacha is that if let's say you forgot and you ate, right? Don't worry about it. You shouldn't show your signs of being that you fasted or that you broke your fast in front of the tzibur. And the other one is that you lo al yanhigi donim b'atzmo, meaning you shouldn't be doing extra things for yourself. Meaning, don't make yourself super proud of yourself. Don't make yourself super out there. Don't put yourself out there. So after the Gemara, after that little bit of introduction, we now know that what happens in the Gemara, in the storyline of this week's Parsha, is that Yosef realizes that he sees his brothers and he identifies them, and he says to them that they are spies. He claims that they are spies, and he puts them on, and basically they have to prove him wrong. And how's he going to prove them wrong? He's going to he asks that all of them go back excuse me, and go back, and they have to bring back Binyamin. And why did they choose that this specifically way? Why this specific way to why do they choose this way, that this is going to be like the whole plot specifically around them being spies? You could have chosen a different way if choosing anything at all. So the Baal Turim on Perek Mem Bet says that Yosef was telling them that they are going to later on, this is an interesting Baal Turim, and says to them that you are later on going to be machshil, you're going to fall in the sin of Chetam Raglim, and therefore since Yehoshua is a tzatzeif, meaning he's from the descendants of Binyamin, so he says that he has to, so he was not going to be the one to fail. But Yehuda says to him, "Is lo yu'avadech raglim," right? Why Yehuda is the one who says that? No, we're not. We look in Perek Mem Bet, we see that Yehuda says we're not. We are not servants. And in fact, if we look, Kalev ben Yefuna, Yehuda also is not a servant. Anyway, so we see that lo hayu, according to the continuation with the Baal Turim, the continuation is that the Kalev ben Yefuna, lo hayu, is the same gematria as Kalev. Anyway, so we go back to. Now this is where we start getting into the Zera Shimshon, and you say here that when the Shvatim go to Yaakov and they explain to him everything that happened and the request of Yosef, or what they're calling the Shalit, right, the ruler, right, it says Yaakov says to them, Lama Harei Otem Li, right? Yaakov says to them is, why did you tell us? Why did you tell Yaakov's claim, or his anger is expressed in the fact that he says, why do you start talking to them about the younger brother who's at home, right? Now, of course, if you open your mouth and you tell someone that you have a younger brother, what do you think the ruler is going to do? The only thing he's going to do, he can do, is exactly that. He's going to say, well, you didn't bring everyone, and therefore I want to see him too, right? And the Midrash, and this is where we're going to get into the Zera Shimshon. The Midrash says that the Hakadosh Baruch Hu was at a Hakapeda, had a little bit of a taina against, a little bit of a claim against Yaakov, because he basically said is called Ra'ah, right? Lama Harei Otem Li, the Ra'ah, right? And he said right now this whole thing should have been viewed as, in Yaakov's eyes, as something good, right? And the Kadosh Baruch Hu says, in continuation with the Midrash, it says, Ani osek lamlich et beno b'Mitzrayim, v'hu omer lama harei otem li. That's a famous Midrash. It's as if to say that Kadosh Baruch Hu is saying is, I'm responsible and I'm dealing with these bigger items, which is to put Yosef in charge, so that way I can prepare the Am Yisrael for Galut and prepare this whole line of things down the way. And you, Yaakov Avinu, are saying Lama Harei Otem, you made it bad. What kind of chutzpah is that? And that is the question. With that, we're going to start the question of the Zera Shimshon. Again, we're in Zera Shimshon 13. So we have to the whole idea of the introduction was just to give us a little context of what was going around. And then says Midrash, Vayomer Yisrael Amar Rotim Li. Why did you treat me so, telling me that you had another brother? Amar Rabbi Levi, Amar Rabbi Chama bar Abba Me'olam Yatzad Devar Shel Batalad B'Pi Aviv Yaakov. The Midrash says that Rabbi Levi says in the name of Rabbi Chama bar Chanina that never did Yaakov say something that was useless or idle. Right? Rather, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm working on making his son the king, although Yaakov doesn't know that. This is why the pasuk later on says in Yeshayahu, it says that in response to Yaakov, why do you say, Yaakov, my way is hidden from Hashem and my cause was passed by God? Meaning, he's saying is the whole idea here is that I don't understand what's going on, right? So the Midrash is asking a good question, and it seems to say that the Zera Shimshon points out a very good question, and the Gemara he points out, he says, Kavanat Midrash Azali Chor Nisteret. Sha'im Balomar Sha'af Pamazot La Yatzad Devar B'Levatalo Halom Mipshatat Shel Devarim Nirash Shetah. Right? It says here that the intent of the Midrash seems to be self-contradictory, meaning in itself it's contradictory. For if it is coming to say that this time Yaakov did not say anything that was idle or that was useless, right? With the simple of his words, it seems that he didn't say anything useless. Right? He apparently just said, listen, the whole situation, and just like many of us do, is we say, oh well, this is a bad situation. Why did this happen to me? Kind of question. Rather, he didn't say it. He didn't. Rather than identifying as coming from Hashem, he just said, "This is the way things fall." Right? If we look at the words, the pure pshat, it sure means that the Midrash said nothing. He didn't actually, and as we see, the pshat is, and the Midrash doesn't necessarily. The Midrash actually seems to contradict what the pshat is. The pshat here seems to say that Yaakov didn't make a mistake. Yaakov was just saying how could you do this to me? He wasn't saying, how could Hashem do this to me? Right? That would have been a real good question, and that would have been a real chutzpah, and we could have easily said that. Then we could have said that Yaakov was making some sort of statement that was against Hashem, or that was that was blasphemous, if you will. But at some point, he doesn't really say that anything idle came out of anything useless or idle came out of a Yaakov's mouth. How can we say that? He wasn't saying it about Hashem. Right? Yaakov should have what should have Shanavi Mochichu Lama to Yaakov. Right? Then the pasuk that the Midrash brings, Vim no Mars Lo Ta'a Lama Navi Mochicho. Right? So if we look at the Midrash that quotes the pasuk in the Navi, and he chastises Yaakov by saying, why do you say, oh Yaakov, my way is hidden from Hashem? Right? But if you say that he didn't make a mistake, why would the Navi have to give him rebuke? Meaning to say is that he didn't make a mistake. Yaakov didn't say anything wrong. Right? He didn't say, I don't understand Hashem's way, or why did Hashem do this bad to me, or I don't understand the ways of Hashem. Right? And that the Midrash seems to imply that that there was some sort of inappropriate statement by Yaakov Avinu, but if you look at the pshat, it's not that at all. He's just saying why did you, my sons, do this? Right? So the two questions that the Zera Shimshon is asking is basically there are two parts to the Midrash. One part is that the Midrash seems to imply that Yaakov never said anything that was unnecessary, right? And if we look at the words themselves, it's not so bad. He just said, "Why did you?" And he was challenging the situation, but he wasn't challenging. He blames his sons for bringing up Binyamin into the entire conversation, but he doesn't really say, why did Hashem make it bad for me? He didn't say why Hashem. And then the pasuk, which seems to contradict, why would the pasuk in Yeshayahu, it says, why would Yaakov, meaning what did Yaakov even say, in a sense of rebuke and kind of giving him a sense of like tochacha? He says to him, why would you say such a thing? Why is my way hidden from Hashem? He's kind of saying, why is this happening? Right? So the two parts, if you say that he didn't make a mistake, then why do we need to have tochacha at all? Right? In other words, we have to look at the question. The whole question of the Midrash seems to go. It doesn't necessarily make sense. We have to understand, why do we even consider this to be some sort of question or challenge on Yaakov Avinu? So if we look at the Zera Shimshon, and the next part of the Zera Shimshon says, V'yesh lomar, de'ein hachinami shelo yatsa davar shel batala mipiv. We have to say is, right, that there really were no words that were the idol, or not, that were not necessary from Yaakov's mouth. Klomar shelo tav lo tala dvarav al tzad mikra. Right, meaning that he did not make a mistake and attribute these statements to just happenstance. Well, that would not be okay. Right, it was not saying that Binyamin had to go down to Mitzrayim only because the brothers happened to tell the shalit to take to rather, indeed, he attributed everything to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Right, he's saying is he knew that Hashem was behind the need for Binyamin to go down to Mitzrayim, and that was what that this would lead to the actual the galut. Right, v'chavanat Yaakov hayta kach she'amru zichronam libracha pasuk ki yipol hanofel mimenu. Right, rather Yaakov's intention was that, as it says in the Gemara in Shabbat 32, it says that about a person who needs to build a fence around his roof. Right, so it says that you should, because why? So that you wouldn't cause anyone by calling the victim a fallen one. Right, by calling the Torah in Dvarim, it says that because by calling the victim a fallen one, right, in truth the victim already deserved to fall regardless, because of his sins that he committed. Right, so it says, if you look there, the whole halacha of ma'akeh is that we're trying to create a preventative measure. So the person has an obligation to create a preventative measure, a roof around a fence around the roof, right? By calling the person someone ra'ui zelipol, by saying that a person is ki yipol hanofel mimenu, means by saying ki yipol hanofel, the person's already means that he's deserved to fall. Right, so regardless of, because of the sins that he committed, he deserves to fall. Right, so why does a person say that? Why does the pasuk say that by not putting up a ma'akeh around the person's roof, right, he's placing blood in his own house, is when he deserves to die anyway. Right, right, is because a harm is brought about through one who's guilty, meaning that certainly the person who falls off the roof must die because of his own sin. Still, Hashem will orchestrate his death specifically through someone else who is also guilty of sin, namely the person who fails to build a fence around his roof. We learn from this that the Gemara is if someone is party to another person's misfortune, he must also be guilty of some sin. Meaning, what are we saying here? Then, and why is this the way the Zera Shimshon is putting these pieces together? So he's saying is that the first, the Gemara is trying to tell us about a ma'akeh, about building a fence around our roof, right? So we're trying not to cause someone else to. Our job is not to allow other or enable someone else to fall and get hurt or perhaps even die. And so the point is that the Gemara there says is that rather that by us, obviously we're putting a fence so that we don't want anyone to hurt but die. But why should we do that? If the person is going to fall, he's going to fall. So the point here he's saying is that rather we have to understand that the person who's chayav in the mitzvah of ma'akeh, if the person does indeed fall off his roof, so he too, the person who is building the ma'akeh, is also some way related, is someone must be guilty of some sort of sin. V'amar Yaakov, and based on this concept, Yaakov says to his son, Yadati ki b'vadai kadosh baruch hu gazar ra'azot. I know that Hashem certainly decreed that Binyamin has to go down to Mitzrayim. However, since it brought around through your hands, must be also you're guilty of some wrongdoing up until now. I guess according to the Zera Shimshon, at least, it seems that Yaakov Avinu, Yaakov Avinu didn't know or wasn't aware of all this, the entire story about the Mechira and everything that happened, right? So rather he's saying is, how could it be that it's not that Yaakov Avinu is saying is that it just, why he's not blaming he's not just saying is, oh, this is just a random thing and it just happens to be the case that Binyamin is going sent down. No, I understand. Yaakov Avinu is saying is, I understand that this is from Hashem, but if you're saying that if this is really from Hashem, that means that the people who were asked to send him down, meaning the 10 other brothers, right, means that they were so guilty of something wrong also. And if they were guilty of something wrong, this starts to begin to create a picture for Yaakov Avinu of there's something not right here. So he says, it would have been affected by others, meaning he's saying is otherwise, someone else would have asked for Binyamin to come down. But because the brothers themselves are the ones who are asking to Binyamin to come down, and they're the ones who raised the idea, milachatchila from the beginning, to Yosef, or to the shalit, to the ruler, right? Which means that they are responsible, and they are the ones who actually are the ones. They're the ones who have to bring it out. They're the ones, because they did something wrong, they're the ones who have to bring it out. And now this is why Yaakov says, Lama ri otem li. Why did you treat me so not inappropriately? Lama gam atem chiyavtem atzmechem lamakom. Meaning, why did you make yourselves guilty to Hashem? Meaning, why did you do something wrong? Ki b'shvil zedit galgala yadchem hara azot. It must be because of this guilt of yours that this misfortune of mine, meaning Yaakov is saying to you, why did you cause your guilt and your misfortune and your whatever you did wrong caused the misfortune of mine was brought about through your hands, right? The Midrash is basically teaching us that Yaakov was not saying that this was some complete error and some idle talk or stam talk that Yaakov was saying, rather they just randomly occurred, some random request, rather, because that would never be the case. Rather, Yaakov certainly knew that Binyamin had to go down to Mitzrayim for that ultimate galut to happen, right? Rather, Yaakov Avinu was giving tochacha and kind of rebuke to his sons for committing some sin that led Hashem to say that they have to be the ones who are the enablers of Binyamin to come down, right? Because then, if they're the ones who are enablers, then he says that means that they are also they're also enablers, meaning they are enablers, and therefore Yaakov now has to become part of the story too. So, right, if Binyamin had to come down, that's clear. Meaning, whether Binyamin has to come down, it's clear. The question here is, why is it that the sons are the ones who have to be a part of this story, and that shows to Yaakov that there's something that they're not telling him. So now the second half of the midrash. Now we have to understand the second half of the midrash, which is really the where the Yaakov kind of says, or the Navi says about Yaakov, that Yaakov says that things are hidden for me. So ve'enan chinami, then the question is, if Yaakov really does believe that everything is from Hashem, then why is he being later on by the Navi? Why is he being criticized or rebuked? Now it's true that Yaakov agreed that everything does indeed come from Hashem. Rather, he thought, Yaakov Avinu thought that the galut will come from as a punishment. Right, that's why he's assumed that the 10 sons are guilty of something wrong that led them to be they're the ones who are the enablers or the catalysts for the galut. Rather, the galut was actually good for them, so that the Jewish people could be in some ways purified in what we call the iron crucible, or what we know as Mitzrayim. Later on, we know that in Devarim, the Mitzrayim is described as Kura Barzel, right? As Kamosha Katabnu Le'el B'Samuch, as we wrote earlier in Drush 10. In Drush 10 there, we see that they needed some sort of, they kind of have to be refined, right? So that rather, the whole idea, even though they did receive, they were enslaved in Mitzrayim, but there was some sort of ultimate good out of what happened in Mitzrayim. I mean, they were refined, and they were refined so much that once they got out of Mitzrayim, they were ready to come out. Therefore, even if the tribes indeed did bring about this galut, it's not a sign that they were guilty, like Yaakov thought, because the exile is not considered necessarily a misfortune. And this is why the Navi actually does give Yaakov tochacha, right? The Navi's tochacha was for thinking that the events were occurring through some sort of, was not that he was thinking that the Navi was giving Yaakov Avinu tochacha, is not that they were thinking that all these events are just happen in some sort of happenstance, or rather some sort of some just random acts. Rather, Yaakov should have considered the exile, should not have considered the galut a misfortune, right? In other words, what he should have said is leading to criticizing his children for sinning. So what the Navi is giving tochacha to Yaakov Avinu is saying is Yaakov, how could you view the galut as something that is ra'ah. How could you be the one to say that? You have to understand that even though I may not understand everything Hashem's ways, but you can't criticize your own children for that, right? Right? As the we have to understand that because if we look at it from that perspective, we could say this is. We could look at it from that perspective. We could say is that everything that happens, even though we may not understand everything, we have to view it as Hashem has a bigger plan, right? And this is that even if we say, right, that even that he spoke, that if we look at now, let's look at it. We look at the fact that Yosef, right? We look at the fact that Yosef was the one who, through Yosef becomes a ruler, and then he has food, and then this whole story with the galut happens, right? But what happens in the galut? Because the galut happens in Mitzrayim, and we start, right, through the galut Mitzrayim, what do we get to do? We get to get Matan Torah, right? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling you, there is a purpose, right? And not only that, we have a purpose also for what Yosef getting arising, right? There's a purpose for everything, and there's everything has a purpose. We have to look at it that way. And Yaakov Avinu kind of missed that mark. And instead of saying I don't understand everything, but there's something bigger, better, rather he's trying to attribute everything. And that's the question here remains is, right, there's still some sort of, there's an ultimate purpose and there's an ultimate reason. Even though Yaakov may not understand it, you can't say that you have to blame your kids for it. That's for sure, right? And now he's saying, now the next, if we go back to, we have a question, right? Sure, that the galut was indeed had some good purpose for the Jewish people, as we know. But how should Yaakov know this, right? That's a great question, right? It's a great question. The Zera Shimshon is going to answer this question, right? How can we blame Yaakov Avinu for asking that question in the moment, in the heat of the moment? Yaakov Avinu, maybe that response was probably a good response. Sho'il damrina b'midrash Rabbah pasuk v'hi Hashem eshba. If we look at the story of Brit ben Abitarim, it says, the Midrash says that Shimon bar Shem Abba Shem Rabbi Yochanan Amar Arba Dvarim Haralo HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Avram Avinu B'Brita ben Abitarim Haralo Gehenom U'Malchiyot U'Matan Torah U'Beit HaMikdash. Right? Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Avram Avinu Kol Zman Shebanecha Asukim B'Shtayim Dahainu B'Torah U'Beit HaMikdash Hem Nitzolim B'Shtayim Dahainu Mishubim Malchiyot U'Gehenom Achim im Pirshu Mimshtayim Dahainu Mifrshu Mi'Torah U'Beit HaMikdash Hem Nidonim B'Shtayim Shibud Malchiyot, which is Galut and Gehenom. So the Hashem and the Midrash is quoted here, but I just read the entire Midrash there. But the Midrash is that basically Avram Avinu, in the time of Brit ben Abitarim, Avram Avinu is told by Hashem that he gets choose either the choice whether Bnei Israel they will either endure Galut or Gehenom. And Hashem, as he tells Hashem, V'or Galut l'tovat Yisrael. Hashem tells him that you should choose Galut, right? It would be better for them because then it will prepare them to receive the Torah and receive Eretz Yisrael. Lo ayalu lachush klal shagalut yal Rakim should not have been at all concerned that the Galut would be bad for them. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, ani osek lamlich b'Mitzrayim. Right? That's the Zera Shimshon says that now the Hashem says, I'm working on bringing his son to be the king. In order to show Bnei Israel that that there's always there's some sort of guiding light, even in the darkness, even in the times when it's difficult to see, right? Even when things are very dark, Hashem is working on it. There are things that are happening, even though they are beyond our view and beyond our pale of understanding. Hashem is doing these things, and how can you do? I'm working on that. Right, so that way he's setting the way. Hashem is paving the way for Bnei Israel and for the Galut. Even when in the Galut, he wants to make it as good as possible, whatever that means. Right, even though so that way that we can understand that the Galut is he's making the path in Galut as good as possible, and that's why, right, as we explained, you're saying is I'm Hashem's ways hidden. Thinking that is a misfortune. What does that mean to say? He's saying is this is if we look at the Midrash, actually, the Midrash that I just brought, which is the full version of the Midrash and not just what the Zera Shimshon brings, right? The Midrash brings one answer, which is Avraham chose Malchuyot, right? Which is the Sheyavu, that will be like some sort of Bachar b'Malchuyot. Right? It's better that they have slavery here in this world, so that way in the world to come, right? In the world to come, they will have. They'll earn instead of having to deal with Gehenom, they'll deal with the Shibud Malchuyot, which is Galut, exile in this world, right? But there is another another opinion in the Midrash which we don't mention in the Zera Shimshon. But if we look there, it says that Avraham actually chose Gehenom, and actually HaKadosh Baruch Hu actually convinced Avraham to say what? That he convinced Avraham, like the full Midrash says, that Avraham, and the Zera Shimshon hints to it a little bit, and he says that Hashem told Avraham, no, don't choose that. Choose the Galut, right? And why did he do that? Because what Yaakov was telling him is that because the Yaakov was saying is, and this is why Yaakov's claim against the Shvatim is that they sinned, it's their cause or their fault is not right. Rather, what Yaakov Avinu did, and this is where the whole issue of the whole point of the Zera Shimshon is, that we have to view things that happen to us and things that happen to Am Yisrael and things that happen in our daily lives and every moment of the life is, we have to really understand that every moment of hardship that we see and that we hard for us to understand and hard for us to accept, even Yaakov Avinu, even in the slightest thing, he was also saying is, I don't understand this. And why did you blame someone else? You cast the blame on the son on the 10 Shvatim, right? Excuse me. So even though we have to, it's hard for us to understand, and even in the heat of the moment, we may say there isn't such a. It's hard for me, and so I don't understand why Hashem is doing this. We have to understand that we have to be able to say is Hashem is preparing the steps. And if we look throughout the last year and a half, perhaps this is why I chose this as the Torah. If we look at the last year and a half, sure, it's difficult, and there are things that none of us will ever understand until the time of the Mashiach comes. But what we can see is that even through these dark times, and even through the stories and the situations and the news and things that happen, we see these things are very difficult for us. And one of the questions that we always ask is, how could Hashem do this? But we have to understand that how could Hashem do this? It has to be followed by, is, how could Hashem do this? I don't know. It's beyond my understanding. But maybe we have to follow that by saying is, there is a silver lining. That silver lining is, look at all the amazing chesed. Look at the amazing achdut that we had. Look at the great things the miracles that we saw in front of our eyes in the last few months. Right? We have to look at those and saying is obviously there are questions that we're never going to be able to answer. But maybe we have to look at it and say is that the difficulties that happen and the things that we're going through and we're experiencing are hard for us to understand. And but we shouldn't blame. We shouldn't cast blame on other people and cast blame on other people, on ourselves, our family, our friends, our community, the country, other people. Right? We shouldn't use this as a cause of sinat chinam, but rather perhaps because we know what sinat chinam is, especially in this week's parsha, we see that sinat chinam is what really is sinat chinam. This was everything's happening because of that. And if we look at it the other way and say, perhaps this is a reason for us to say is, let's look at the the silver lining, and say Hashem has His understanding. We don't understand it, but Hashem has a reason for it, and He's every step of the way. There's something that's happening. Another piece of the chessboard is being moved, and so that way we can get closer to Mashiach. And then maybe we should end with a little piece of something about Chanukah, right? We know that the Torah is nimshal to fire, right? And we also know that the Torah is nimshal to fire, and we know that Bnei Israel are nimshal to Hashem is also nimshal to fire, obviously, and we also know Bnei Israel is nimshal to they're compared to oil. Right, they're like oil. Right, that's oil is there, and then we also have the fire from Hashem that's coming down. The Torah from Hashem is coming down, and what connects the fire and the oil? The wick. The wick is the petilah. If we look at if we move around the words of petilah, the letters of petilah, we get tefillah. The connection between our Torah HaKadosh Baruch Hu and us, Bnei Israel, is the tefillot that we have, and we should daven to continuously say that we should always look through the eyes of maybe not understanding everything that Hashem does, but that He has an ultimate purpose, and that's why we can also look at why we say the end of we say in Shemona Esrei we say Matzmiach Keren Yeshua, right? He plants the seed. The Matzmiach from the lashon, from the language of to plant. Keren, he puts a little bit, like that little bit, the principle, right? The Keren is always the principle. He puts that little seed in. He keeps on planting the seeds, right? Just so that way the Yeshua that every time everything happens, we see is another seed in the ultimate garden, if you will, to get to Geula. So maybe we have to look at it that way, and maybe B'ezrat Hashem, during these dark days, like Chanukah always does, it always comes out in the darkest time of the year. Perhaps during these dark times that we may not understand everything, the light of Chanukah should enlighten us and brighten for us the path of Geula, and allow us to see that the light of Torah and light of mitzvot and the light of those around us that we care about enlighten us and brighten us for us the path of Geula, and that may we see B'ezrat Hashem that we not blame other people, not blame the situations on other people and around surrounding, but rather view it as a light that slowly is shining us bright to the Geula. Chag Sameach.